Welcome everybody to hashtag Push the Future with Standard Bank SA. I'm Lerato Appolus. I'm here with Molobeng, Serame, and we're here today to discuss paper 2, question 1 of the ITC Jan 2020. Just to help you guys as you're preparing for your CTA exams and your ITC exams. Thank you so much for joining us. Molobeng, when I saw this question, I was like, wowza, what a question. Where do you even begin?
Yeah, I must admit it was a lot of information, and how I approached it was I segmented the information and I highlighted what I thought would be important or would come up in a question. And when I looked at the question, I was like, whoa, okay, yeah. Is this a manic question? It's been almost just over a decade since I wrote my board exam. Exactly. So I was like, what question is this? And it's not straightforward, and that's the beauty about it, because in the practical world, nobody comes to you and says, "Oh, Lerato, I've got an activity-based costing question."
Exactly.
It's real life example.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how I approached it was, what was quite evident was you had two divisions. You had a tax division. You had an audit division.
For me, I was like, "Is this an auditing question? Is this a tax question? What are we dealing with here?" Yeah.
So what you're actually dealing with, and it's so relevant in the COVID context where people are trying to cut costs. What you are dealing with here, particularly with question 1, is you've got an audit firm that's committed and has hired people, but based on their budget, it looks like they're going to make a loss.
Yes.
And I do envisage that a lot of companies will be going through that right now.
Exactly. So it's a real life kind of question.
Absolutely. And a typical reaction would be, where do we cut costs?
Exactly.
And this is exactly what is happening here. They've made decisions to cut out one audit manager, to retrench one audit manager and one senior manager, to no longer hire, and to have to put non-performing staff on performance management. But what was lacking for me here was the rationale behind the decisions being made. And I was quite excited to see the actual question then being us having to discuss.
So let's go through it. It says, draft a memo to the financial manager of DNA in which you critically discuss with supporting calculations, where relevant, the budget and related information, and include any questions you may have for the financial manager.
So I approached it as follows. The audit division and tax are two separate divisions. It's quite evident. I did, however, categorize the different levels of management, and I looked at them as if they were separate business units.
Okay.
So the directors would be one unit, the audit directors would be one unit, senior managers would be one unit, and then I'll go on to calculate their profitability. Okay. And that is what comes out in the solution is they've gone and said, what is the average revenue that we make per employee per division? And it's quite evident the directors of the tax division bring in more revenue than the directors of the audit division. Okay. And it was quite a simple calculation. They just took total revenue of the directors divided by the number of directors in that unit.
Okay.
Then they further went to say how much of the two business units contribute to the bigger audit firm. And I think it's quite a reflection of a typical audit firm. Audit brings in more money than the tax division. And that's just a ratio calculation that was done there. And what was interesting was the cost of the employees or the categories of employees relative to the revenue they bring in.
Okay.
So if you look at each employee and you look at them as a business unit,
yes,
you realize that actually your directors are costing you 89% of every rand they're bringing in. So that says 89 cents of a rand that you bill for a director is a cost. So you're effectively making 11%, and that's the GP margin that's been calculated. And the interesting part in this one is where we are considering cutting costs, that's where we are most profitable. So what they've done is said, what's the average profit per category of employee? And from the calculations below, the GP on revenue, your first year trainees bring you 62 cents of every rand that is spent on them.
Okay.
You have a return of 62% on their revenue. Directors, you're only returning, and I'm focusing for now on the audit division. Directors you're only making a profit of 11 cents in the rand, and your managers 41%. That's quite impressive, I must say.
Yeah.
And obviously in the tax department, you have higher margins, and that's because of the high efficiency. So I'm going to assume that this paper is read and we understand,
yes,
you know, the different rates being charged by the different departments.
Okay.
But when I looked at it, it was nothing new. And maybe the question would be, why does the tax department charge so much higher?
Yes.
I think it's partly from a specialist perspective.
Okay.
They're more specialized, unlike the audit can be a little bit general.
Yeah.
And they level, sometimes the tax department can have people who have postgraduate
and master's degrees yes.
in tax.
Yeah.
So there's deep specializations
yes.
there. So after having calculated the profit per business unit, in this case a business unit is a trainee or a manager, the different levels of the organogram.
So every different, you'd say it's a business unit.
Yes,
okay.
Because now they're considering retrenching a manager, and you can't just make a decision and thumbsuck. It has to be supported by some kind of calculation. And in this case, we are seeing that where they are looking to cut costs, that's where they're actually more profitable. And where they're looking to retain, that's where actually the biggest revenue is being absorbed by a heavy cost base.
Okay.
And some of the critical points to discuss here that are quite obvious is the mix of audit versus tax. Audit, obviously, in this case, the audit division takes up 73% of the total company size. But what is evident is that the tax division brings in the most money and has the highest efficiency rate. So for every rand that is invested in the tax division, there's a higher profit. And from a strategy perspective, I would almost take a bird's eye view and say, let me not only focus on audit. I'm getting a higher return on the tax department.
Yes.
Let me now try and grow my tax department and invest more in the tax department.
You're actually going there and answering part C of this question when they talk about how do we make the audit division more profitable. But we'll talk about it. Let's continue.
Okay. And one of the other factors here is the efficiency, particularly of the directors who cost a lot more. So in my previous world, they were audit partners.
Yes.
And if you have a sense of what the audit firms look like, the partners spend a lot of time doing business development work.
Okay.
So it's not work that they can charge directly to a client.
Yes.
They're out there looking for new business opportunities, particularly in the audit division. However, once you get into the tax division, the tax almost get leads in some instances from the audit division.
Yes.
So it makes sense to an extent why the audit director efficiency rates are so low. It's because they spend a lot more time doing non-core audit work and trying to find new businesses.
And perhaps that should be when you're answering question 3, when you're critically evaluating the cost efficiencies of the audit firm. Maybe if you're going to do a performance review, performance manage employees, maybe performance manage the directors who are not bringing as many clients as other ones.
Yes. In this example, they don't say how the managers, or rather how the directors are being measured. As it stands, it's how much are they billing to audit and how much are they costing. But I totally agree with you. You need to take a 360 view on a business like this. And one of the other points that kind of surprised me was the CPD hours.
Yes.
If this company is going to attract the right level of talent, they need to be able to offer their prospective trainees a safe learning environment while they're going through their articles.
Exactly.
So I would not consider cutting out CPD hours
and
as
that is exactly what
measure.
They consider as part of the ways to cost cut. And from a psycho point of view, if you're going to offer a training contract, you have to offer CPD hours. So it will be a reputational risk if you as an audit firm are not offering CPD. How are you going to be able to get quality trainees in the future if you're not offering CPD? And what is it going to look like when those trainees leave your firm, when they haven't had additional continuous performance development from a CPD perspective?
Yeah. And how do you sign them off?
Exactly.
You're right. You're sitting with a massive reputational risk issue there. The other issue that stood up was the retrenchment idea. And to me, there were two factors here. There's a new business, there's a new client that they could potentially acquire, but they're also considering retrenching. It doesn't make sense. You need to be able to have the right level of staff to be able to service your clients and to be able to support your growth prospects. So it really didn't make sense to me why you want to retrench. It sounded more like a knee-jerk reaction more than a strategic, decision being made. So from that perspective, and you cannot just retrench. There's laws around it. You're sitting also again with the reputational risk. I would not have gone that route at all without considering a full picture view.
A long-term view.
Yes.
Because you could retrench now in the short term, it could work financially for you, but as the business grows, you're going to need more staff members and you'll be losing key staff members as you retrench.
Happy. I totally agree with you on that one. So there were quite a number of marks here. This question was only given, allocated 30 marks. But from a discussion point of view, we've touched on audit versus tax, where the different profits come from and the extent to which the tax division contributes to the profitability of the firm. We've touched on possibly looking more for tax opportunities or expanding the tax department, seeing that it's highly profitable. There's higher efficiencies coming from the tax division, and there's obviously room for growth there. We've touched on using some kind of science to identify opportunities to cut costs and not just be thumb-sucking and saying, I'm getting rid of my lowest staff members as a means to cut costs. And those are some of the decisions most of us are probably going to be faced with now.
Exactly.
In an economic downturn. So maybe I'll go into some of the issues that were highlighted that I thought these were low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
If I was a student, I would have definitely jotted these down first. Right. So we've spoken about the specialized nature of tax, the size of the audit division, absorbing a lot more costs. So I would look at, again, the method used to allocate costs to each division. I think there's definitely room for improvement there. It looks like, obviously, by virtue of its size, the audit division is incurring a lot of indirect costs that are just being allocated from head office.
Yeah.
We would typically call those head office costs that are just allocated and you don't have much control over.
Yeah.
So I would look at the method at which or with which these costs are being allocated and see if it's fair and if it's a true reflection of the extent to which we are absorbing the overheads.
Yes.
Right. So those were definitely low-hanging fruit. I touched on a bit on the retrenchments and the process of retrenching and the possible legal implications and the reputational risk. CPD hours, you definitely cannot cut those down. And getting the right mix. I would look at the right mix and try to cross-skill to an extent. You've got article or trainees in the tax division and trainees in the audit division, and the tax division is highly specialized. So I'd really try to get skills transferred across and get my audit trainees to try and do some tax work.
Yeah.
And that can lift their efficiencies.
That's true. And for that clerk who's going to be leaving that firm, they'll leave there with multiple skills as well.
Yeah.
So I think what's important here from part A from that question is the critically evaluate with supporting calculations. I think students are always scared of the word critically evaluate. They're scared that they cannot say anything negative. And they don't know how to support it. I see in this question, it's a 10-mark question just for calculations, but there were 17 marks allocated. So there was a lot of opportunity for you to gain marks just from support, just from doing some calculations and supporting those calculations in your argument of critically evaluating that the decision is correct. And then we'll just move on to part C if there's anything else.
No, I think just from your earlier point, because the part A question said, I would have to draft a memo and respond to questions from the finance manager, not finance minister. So it's really put yourself in the shoes of an audit manager or an audit partner, and you're having to go and discuss your budget and some of the decisions you are making, and really just be able to support every decision and say, this is how I came to this conclusion, and not just I've decided,
Yes.
And again, to your point around when we see these big words on a question paper, critically discuss, imagine you are in that meeting room and people are throwing these suggestions at you and you have some discomfort around what is being suggested, then put that in proper academic writing.
Yeah.
And discuss, but you can definitely go into part C.
Okay. So part C also says critically evaluate the actions proposed by Virat and George to restore the audit division to profitability. The points raised by Virat and George are basically arguing a cost reduction. For example, they want to retrench, they want to put people on performance review, they want to cut costs on entertainment. But the question actually talks about restoring the profitability. Profitability is twofold. Yes, from a cost perspective, you can cut costs and it'll increase your profitability. But if you really want to generate true profits, I would say here, Virat and George need to concentrate on how to increase revenue. One of the ways to do that, as Molobeng had alluded to earlier, is to see how you can expand and work on the tax division here, as it is a more profitable division for the company as a whole. It's already making 73.3%. It's a larger division. So how can you pull nuances from the tax division to make sure that the audit division is as profitable as well? Because maybe some of the tax clients are not audit clients, and how do we make sure that we can work parallel to make sure if it's a tax client, it can also be an audit client? One of the other issues for me, and I also raise it, is the issue of retrenchment. Retrenchment, yes, is a good way of reducing your costs from a salaries perspective. You pay out a huge lump sum for retrenchment costs and all of that, and in the short term, you see it being value for money. But in the long term, if the company is preparing to grow, post-COVID-19, post all these issues that we're facing now, you would have been losing very skilled people, knowledgeable people, and it will be more expensive for you to have to now hire skilled staff and make sure your company grows. So that is critically evaluating. Yes, there's a positive to it, but there's also a negative impact to it, right? And you also question, will they be legally able to retrench at this point? What are the legal implications of it? What are the issues from a union perspective, if there is a union involved in this instance? You can write those points down. The question is a 10-mark question, but there are 34 marks available. So you can really go on and on in terms of questioning the decisions that the directors are making. I think students are always scared to do that. They think that if they question, it could be wrong. But if you apply your mind critically, you can put questions down and actually win. The other one was on CPDs. They want to cut down on CPDs. They also want to performance manage staff members who are not working, and they want to make sure that they leave the firm. That could be a staff morale issue. You don't want to have staff members who are not happy to come to work, who are not connected, and who are not committed, because now there's threats of retrenchments. There's threats of if you underperform, you will be kicked out. So that will impact the performance of the company and the profitability of the company as a whole.
Interesting you raised that. Actually, it's one of the things I thought. The audit division has got such low efficiency rates when you compare to the tax division. And it's not evident from the narrative that we are given as to what are the underlying issues. And it almost looks like from a third-year group perspective, there's a bit of a morale factor coming in, because these are your more experienced trainees.
Yes.
They are managing trainees, they're leading audits, but they actually have a low efficiency rate. So to your point, I agree with what you are saying, in the sense that it's one thing to say, I'm going to put you on performance management, but what culture are you driving? What message are you sending out? And how is it then affecting your efficiency? Because you're expecting people to work X amount of hours. Is it just work, as in I'm sitting in front of my desk, or am I really being productive?
Exactly, exactly. I think the other thing here, when they talk about training and CPD, you are allowed to say that this could be a reputational risk to the firm. You could talk about the issues of SICA, that it being mandatory for article clerks to be exposed to CPD, as well as ISA 220 requires the firm to implement appropriate quality control procedures at an engagement level. The lack of CPD and reduction in staff might affect the engagement partner's ability to comply with the requirements of ISA 220, and that's a free mark. You'd have that already in your book, so you can just go to tag ISA 220 and put that in, and there's a free mark for you. So 34 marks are allocated to this question that are available. You'll get 10. So I think for me, what I used to do is say, if it's a 10-mark question, maybe I should put 20 points or 15 points, not 10, because 10 means maybe I'll probably get 5 marks out of the 10. So put 20 to get yourself. That was just a trick I used to say, okay, if I've got 10 marks, maybe I should put more than 10 points, just to make sure that I get enough points.
Yeah, and you know what? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Keep it simple. Don't try and code and be complicated. Really, really, if I look at the memo, it's really straightforward things, and take it step by step from what are the problem, what is the challenge, and address the challenge. How do I explain this to a layman? And this is really the beauty. I wish I had written this paper, not the one I wrote many years ago. But the beauty with this paper is it's easy to explain. It's stuff that's easy to explain. And the way they've asked the question, I know it sounds like it's an overload, but it's like explaining your decision to someone.
Yes.
And saying, this is how I came to this decision. And just do your calculations and explain.
Yes.
And that is really free marks.
Look, I mean, I'll be honest, when I read the question, I would have probably taken a loo break. I would have probably gotten up and taken a bit of a walk, caught my breath a bit, just to ease my mind into understanding exactly what it is that they are asking of me, because it is an information overload. It's a lot of words that you have to go through and really, really understand. I think the biggest thing for me writing my ITC and CTA was to just make sure that I keep a calm mind. Just to keep calm and know that it can be. Hashtag it can be. That it is possible for you to pass. And you know your stuff once you're in the exam room.
It has been done before, guys. You can do this. I'm almost like now quoting hashtag it can be. It really can be done. It's not impossible. Just keep calm and do not try to complicate things. Do not think big words. Keep it simple, like you are explaining to your classmate or a person a grade below you.
Yes, but I also think the biggest thing as well is to conclude. Always conclude on your argument. So as you're critically evaluating, always come to a conclusion on your argument, and that is another additional 1 mark or 2 marks as well.
Happy. So look, I think I've covered question 1 in sufficient detail. If there are any further questions, please post your questions onto Facebook on this video. I'll definitely avail myself to answer your questions. And I'm sure, Lerato,
I'll do the same.
You will do the
Thank
same.
you so much, Molobeng, for joining us. We would love to go into more of these questions. It's a 100-mark question, but we don't have that much time to get into it. But thank you so much for joining us. Hashtag push the future. Good luck to everybody writing the APC next week, everybody who's preparing for ITC and CTA. From me, Lerato, and from Molobeng at Standard Bank, hashtag push the future. Thank you.
Thank you.